The morning I found my daughter on my porch steps, I was carrying a basket of green beans from the garden. It was early September, the kind of morning where the air still holds summer, but you can smell autumn waiting just behind it. I had been up since 5, the way I always am, now that I'm past 60 and sleep doesn't come the way it used to. The beans needed picking before the heat set in, and I liked that quiet hour, just me and the mockingbird that lives in the elm tree at the corner of the yard. I came around the side of the house and stopped. She was sitting on the bottom step with her knees pulled to her chest. My daughter, 34 years old. Her left eye was swollen shut. The sleeve of her blouse was torn at the shoulder and she had dried mud on both hands like she'd fallen and caught herself on the gravel drive. The basket hit the ground before I knew I'd dropped it. Green beans scattered everywhere. "Baby," I said. Just that one word. She looked up at me and her good eye filled with tears, and she said very quietly, "I didn't know where else to go." I got her inside. I got her to the kitchen table. I ran cold water over a clean dish towel and pressed it gently to her face, and she winced and reached up and grabbed my wrist, not to stop me, just to hold on to something solid. "Tell me," I said. She shook her head. "Not yet. I made tea. I didn't push." I have learned, in 63 years of living, that there are things a person can only say when their body has stopped shaking first. Her name is Adele. She has her father's dark eyes and my mother's stubborn chin, and she has been married for 6 years to a man named Ray, whose mother, from the very first Sunday I met her, looked at my daughter the way you look at something you found stuck to the bottom of your shoe. His mother's name is Constance. I want you to remember that name. We have always been a black family in a small Georgia town where that still means something it shouldn't in the year we're living in. Adele married into a family that was lighter, that had money going back 2 generations, that sat in the front pew of the Baptist church on Sundays and smiled the kind of smiles that don't reach the eyes. Constance never said anything outright. She was too careful for that. She would say things like, "Adele, you're so exotic looking," and I suppose some people appreciate that kind of boldness. Little paper cuts, every holiday, every Sunday dinner for 6 years. Ray never stopped her. That was the thing I could never forgive him for. Not the things Constance said. The fact that my son-in-law stood right there and let his mother say them and then asked my daughter to pass the sweet potatoes. Adele finished her tea. She set the cup down carefully, like she was being very deliberate about everything. "She came to the house yesterday," she said, "while Ray was at work." I waited. "She said she needed to talk to me about something important. She said Ray was thinking about asking me for a divorce, and she wanted me to hear it from family first." Adele stopped. She looked at her hands. I knew it wasn't true. I knew her, but she said it so calmly, like she was telling me the weather. And then she said, her voice broke. She said that if I had come from better stock, none of this would be happening. She said my blood was always going to be the problem. That's the word she used. Stock. Like I was livestock. I felt something go very still inside me. The kind of still that is not peace. "And when I told her to get out of my house," Adele said, "she laughed. She laughed, Mama. And then she left. And I called Ray, and he didn't answer. And I called again, and he texted back and said he was busy and he'd talk to me later." She pressed the towel against her eye. "I got in the car. I was going to drive to his office. I don't even remember exactly. I was so upset. I took the back road, the one by Hester Creek, and I went off the embankment." The car had rolled. She had climbed out through the window. She had walked 2 miles on a sprained ankle to a gas station where a woman she'd never met had let her use the phone. She had called the only person she knew would come without asking 20 questions first. She had called my brother Clement. Clement is 71 years old, and he was at that gas station in 19 minutes. He was the one who brought her to my house. He had called me from the road, but I hadn't heard my phone. He came in through the back door while I was still sitting with Adele. He set his keys on the counter without a word. He looked at his niece's face. He looked at me. "Ray know where she is?" he asked. "No," I said. Clement nodded slowly. He pulled out a chair and sat down. And then he said, "All right, tell me everything from the beginning. I need to tell you about my brother before I go further, because you have to understand who he is. Clement raised me after our mother got sick. I was 14. He was 22. He worked 2 jobs and made sure I stayed in school and never once complained about it. He has a way of listening that makes you feel like the whole world has slowed down and the only thing that matters is what you're saying. He was a police officer for 31 years. He knows how things work, and he knows how people lie, and he has never in his life let anyone in our family stand alone when it mattered." Adele told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he asked 4 questions, quiet and specific, and then he picked up his phone. "Who are you calling?" I asked. "My friend over at the county hospital," he said. "We need documentation of those injuries before she talks to anyone else." That was the moment I understood this was not going to end the way Constance expected it to. We went to the hospital. The doctor there, a young woman with tired eyes and a kind manner, examined Adele and documented everything. Contusions on the left orbital socket, bruising along the left jaw and cheekbone, sprained right ankle consistent with a fall, lacerations on both palms. While the doctor was writing her report, Clement stepped outside and made 2 more calls. I sat with Adele and held her hand. She had gotten past the shaking and moved into that hollow quiet that comes after. I have seen it before. It is the face of a person who is reorganizing everything they thought was true. "Did Ray do this?" I asked her. Gently, "Just the 2 of us." She shook her head. "No, he didn't. He's weak, Mama, but he's not violent. This was the car." "But you think Constance, she came to the house to upset me. She knew I was pregnant." She stopped. "She knew I was prone to. I told Ray I'd been having anxiety behind the wheel since the 2nd trimester. He must have told her." I looked at my daughter. "Adele, you're pregnant." She had not told me yet. 8 weeks. She had been waiting for the 12-week mark. She pressed her lips together and nodded, and then she put her face in her hands and cried. The way you cry when the thing you've been holding finally gets too heavy. I put my arms around her and I let her cry, and I looked at the wall above her head and I made myself a promise. Clement came back in when the doctor was finishing. He had a look on his face I recognized from when we were children. He gets it when he has already decided something but hasn't said it out loud yet. "I talked to a friend of mine," he said. "Retired detective. She's going to make some inquiries about the road conditions on that embankment, specifically whether anyone called in about a vehicle in distress in that area in the last 48 hours. I frowned. "Why 48 hours? "Because Constance lives 4 miles from that stretch of road," he said, "and someone reported seeing a car pulled off on the shoulder near the creek around 3 in the afternoon yesterday, 2 hours before Adele went off the embankment." The room got very quiet. "Clement," I said. "I'm not saying anything," he said. "I'm just saying there are questions worth asking." We brought Adele back to my house. We did not tell Ray where she was. He had called twice by then. Clement looked at me and I looked at him and we agreed, without speaking, to let it go to voicemail. Ray's voicemail was brief and irritated. He said he'd heard from his mother that Adele had been rude to her and he thought they needed to have a real conversation about boundaries. He did not ask about the car accident. His mother had told him about the conversation, but apparently not what had happened after. Clement played it back twice. Then he set the phone face down on the kitchen table. "He doesn't know about the accident," I said. "No," Clement said. "Which means she didn't tell him." We let that sit. My neighbor Augustina came over that evening. She's known Adele since she was 6 years old. Used to babysit her on Friday nights so I could take my nursing classes. She brought a pot of chicken soup and sat with Adele while Clement and I talked on the back porch. The night was cooling down. I could hear the creek frogs starting up. "Her friend at the law firm," Clement said. "The one who did her lease, Is she still there? Sylvia? Yes. Why? Because what Adele describes, being deliberately provoked into a dangerous emotional state by someone who knew about a pre-existing vulnerability, resulting in physical harm, that's a conversation a lawyer needs to have. I looked at him. Do you think it was intentional? He was quiet for a long moment. I think Constance is a woman who has spent 60 years getting what she wants by calculating exactly how much pressure to apply and where. I think she showed up at that house for a reason. Whether she expected the car or not, I don't know. He paused. But I think she is not finished. He was right about that. 2 days later, Constance called me directly. I had not spoken to the woman in 8 months, not since Christmas, and she called my personal cell phone at 7 in the morning. She was pleasant. She was warm. She said she had heard there had been a little accident and she was so relieved Adele was all right, and she hoped there were no hard feelings about their conversation. She had only been trying to help. I let her talk. She said she thought it might be good for everyone if Adele came home soon, that Ray was worried, that extended time apart wasn't healthy for a marriage, that she was sure Adele understood. I said, Constance, I'm going to need you to stop talking. Silence. I know what you did, I said. I don't have all of it yet, but I will. And I want you to think very carefully about your next move, because my brother spent 31 years learning how people like you operate, and he has not forgotten a thing. She laughed. The same way Adele said she laughed in the house. Easy and dismissive. I don't know what you think you know, she said. That's fine, I said. You'll find out. I hung up. My hands were steady. I surprised myself with that. Clement's friend, the retired detective, a woman named Bea, who wore her silver hair short and drank her coffee black. She came to my house on the 4th day. She sat at the kitchen table with a small notepad and she told us what she had found. The car on the shoulder near the embankment the day before the accident had been reported by a farm worker coming off his shift. Dark blue sedan. Partial plate. Constance drove a dark blue Buick. It proved nothing. It was not nothing. There was more. Constance had, in the past year, called Ray's office 4 times. His secretary had logged them. Each call happened within a week of one of Ray and Adele's scheduled counseling appointments. Constance somehow knew about, though Adele had never told her. Ray had been telling his mother things. Private things. Things from inside their marriage. Adele sat across the table and heard this with a stillness that broke my heart. He told her about my driving anxiety, she said quietly. We talked about it in our last session. He said he was worried about me. She stopped. He wasn't worried about me. He was reporting back. Sylvia, the lawyer, came over that same evening. She reviewed everything Bea had shared and listened to Adele's account. She was careful and precise in the way that good lawyers are. She told us what could be proven, what couldn't, and where the real exposure was. The accident alone, without direct evidence of intent, is difficult, she said. But the pattern of behavior, the documented harassment, the deliberate emotional provocation of a pregnant woman, the privacy breach through the husband, that paints a picture. If there's any indication Adele's medical status was used to create a foreseeable risk of harm, we have something real. She looked at Adele. Are you willing to make a formal statement? Adele looked at me, then at Clement. Yes, she said. Ray came to my house that Friday. I had agreed to see him, alone, without telling Adele he was coming, because Clement thought it was important to hear what he would say when he didn't have time to prepare. He sat in my living room, and he looked young. He has always looked young. He is 37 years old, and he has the face of someone who has never been required to reckon with the consequences of his own choices. He said he was worried about Adele. He said he missed her. He said his mother had not meant any harm, that she just expressed herself in ways that were sometimes misunderstood, that he hoped I could see that. I said, "Do you know your wife is pregnant?" He blinked. Something moved across his face. He had not known. She was going to tell you at 12 weeks, I said. She was waiting. She wanted it to be a good moment. And then your mother came to her house and called her livestock, and she got in her car while she was 8 weeks pregnant and went off an embankment and walked 2 miles on a broken ankle. The color left his face. She didn't tell me it was that bad, he said. She shouldn't have to tell you, I said. You should have asked. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at his hands. He looked like a man seeing himself clearly for the first time and finding the image very difficult to hold. I told my mother about the driving anxiety, he said. I didn't. I wasn't thinking. I was just talking to her. I do that. I've always done that. He stopped. I didn't know she would. You never asked what she would do with the things you told her, I said. You never considered it, because you've never had to. She has always managed things in your favor, and you have always let her, and you called it love. He didn't argue. That told me more than anything he could have said. What do I do? He asked. That's not a question I can answer for you, I said. But I'll tell you what I know. My daughter is carrying your child. She has been trying to build something real with you for 6 years, while your mother has worked quietly to make her feel like nothing. And now there are lawyers involved, and a retired detective and a report that puts your mother's car near the scene of my daughter's accident. So whatever you decide to do, I would think very carefully. He sat with that for a long moment. Then he said, Can I see her? Not today, I said. Maybe not for a while. She gets to decide that. He nodded. He stood up. At the door, he turned back and said, Ms. And then he stopped and changed it. I'm sorry for all of it. Not just the last week. All of it. I closed the door behind him and stood in my hallway for a moment with my hand still on the knob. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing like this is simple. Adele stayed with me. Her ankle healed. The bruising faded. She started sleeping through the night again around the 3rd week, and the morning I heard her laughing in the kitchen with Augustina over something on the radio. I had to step outside so they wouldn't see me cry. Sylvia filed a formal complaint with the county civil court. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Negligent endangerment. The documentation Bea had assembled, combined with Adele's formal statement and the hospital report, was substantial. Constance hired a lawyer from Atlanta. There were depositions. Constance, it turned out, was not as careful as she had always believed herself to be. She had sent 2 text messages to Ray in the week before the accident, referencing a plan to have a talk with Adele that might help things along. Ray, to his credit, and I believe to his genuine horror at what he had enabled, turned those messages over to Sylvia without being asked. He also told Adele he was in therapy. Individual, not couples. He said he wasn't asking anything from her. He just wanted her to know. Adele told me about it one evening while we were sitting on the back porch. She was 20 weeks by then, the baby visible and real, and she had one hand resting on the curve of her belly, the way you do in something as precious, and you want to feel that it's still there. I don't know what I'm going to do about him, she said. You don't have to know yet, I said. I keep thinking. She stopped. She looked out at the elm tree. I keep thinking about what she said. About my blood. My stock. She was quiet. And I keep thinking about Grandma May and how she raised 5 kids after Granddad left, and how she worked at that laundry for 22 years and still managed to send Uncle Clement to school. And about you. And about, she touched her belly. I want this baby to know where it comes from. Not what Constance thinks about it, what it actually comes from. I reached over and took her hand. Then you tell them, I said. You tell them every story you know. You tell them about Grandma May and the laundry and the 5 kids. You tell them about the green beans and the mockingbird and the morning I found you on the steps and how we got back up. All of it. That's the blood they come from. Nobody else gets to name it. She leaned her head on my shoulder and we sat there until the frogs started up at the creek and the first stars came through. The civil case settled 4 months later. Constance was required to pay a substantial sum for Adele's medical expenses, the cost of the totaled vehicle, and additional damages. She was also required to have no direct contact with Adele for a period of 3 years. There were no criminal charges. Bea had been honest with us about the limits of what could be proven. But the judge's comments in the civil proceeding were not kind to Constance. She did not look like herself when she left the courthouse. She looked like someone who had finally been made to see how much room she had taken up in other people's lives. Ray and Adele are still figuring it out. I can't tell you how that ends because I don't know yet. I know he comes to my house sometimes on Sunday afternoons and sits with Adele on the back porch and they talk, and sometimes Augustina brings sweet tea out, and sometimes they laugh a little, and sometimes they just sit quietly. He comes to the doctor's appointments. He doesn't push. Maybe that's something. Maybe it's not enough. That's Adele's call, and I trust her to make it. The baby is a girl. They have not settled on a name yet, but Adele told me last week she has been thinking about May, after her grandmother. I told her I thought that was exactly right. This morning I was out in the garden before the heat, the way I always am. The mockingbird was in the elm tree. The air smelled like the end of summer coming on. I looked at the bottom porch step, and I thought about that September morning and the basket of green beans on the ground and my daughter sitting there with her knees to her chest. I thought about all the things Constance believed about bloodlines and breeding and what gets passed down, and I thought she was not entirely wrong that blood matters. She was only wrong about what it carries. What gets passed down in my family is this: you do not stay down. You get help, and you get up, and you face what needs facing, and then you sit on the porch in the evening, and you listen to the frogs, and you put your hand on what is precious, and you hold on. That is the only inheritance that has ever mattered to me. And it is more than enough. I have been thinking, these past months, about what Constance actually believed she was doing. I don't think she saw herself as a cruel person. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. People like Constance rarely do. They have a story they tell themselves, that they are protecting their family, preserving something valuable, making difficult decisions that softer people won't. She looked at my daughter and saw a threat to an order she had spent her whole life maintaining, and she dealt with that threat the way she had always dealt with inconvenient things, carefully, quietly, with just enough pressure applied in just the right place. What she did not account for was that we had spent our whole lives learning exactly the same skill. She just hadn't been paying attention to us. That is the thing about people who underestimate others based on what they think they know about bloodlines and breeding and who belongs where. They stop watching. They assume the outcome before the story is finished. Constance assumed my daughter was alone, that I was just a woman with a garden and a porch, that my brother was just an old man who used to be something but wasn't anymore. She made her calculations based on what she could see, and she missed everything underneath. What I know now, what this whole year has taught me in a way nothing else could, is that the choices we make in moments of pressure reveal exactly who we are, not who we intend to be, who we actually are. Ray stood in my living room and looked at his hands and said I didn't know she would, and I believed him. I believed him. He genuinely had not followed his own actions to their conclusion. He had handed his mother a weapon because it was easier than having a hard conversation, and he had told himself that was love, and he had never once asked what happened on the other end of it. That is not cruelty. That is a different kind of failure, and in some ways a harder one to face, because there is no villain to point at. There is only a man who chose comfort over courage, over and over, for 6 years, until the cost of that choice landed on my daughter's face, and he could not look away from it anymore. Adele sat on my porch last week with her hand on her belly, and she said she wanted her daughter to know where she comes from. I have been thinking about that ever since. What we pass down is not just the shape of our eyes or the sound of our laugh. We pass down the pattern of how we respond when things get hard. Clement drove 19 minutes to a gas station without asking a single question, because that is what our people do. We show up first and ask later. My mother worked 22 years at a laundry and still managed to send her brother to school because she understood that what you build matters more than what you're handed. I picked green beans in the early morning because the work needed doing, and I have never waited for someone else to do the work that is mine. That is what Constance could not see in us because she was too busy looking at what she thought we lacked to notice what we had built. And that is exactly why she lost.